It is almost that time of year for Hearthstone where we will be seeing a rotation. Three sets from the Year of the Griffin here will be rotating out of Standard into Wild only, and we will start getting new expansions. There's typically also going to be some other changes in addition to just these three sets leaving, including changes to the core set and even whatever else is planned down the pipeline for whatever the new year of is for 2023. So let's take a look at these sets really quick here and talk about what these are. So the sets that will be leaving Standard around April, whenever the new expansion and rotation happens, is going to be Forged in the Barrens, the United in Stormwind, and Fractured in Alterac Valley. So these sets all came out, they kind of had a storyline, a theme to them, and they are going to be leaving Standard now with a lot of kind of impactful cards and mechanics that we've had in Standard for quite a while now. So we're going to jump in over these videos and take a look at some of those very impactful cards. Let's get to it. In this video, I want to cover mostly neutrals here, but I do want to mention Death Knight. Death Knight is very new and did not come out in 2021. So because of that, there shouldn't really be any rotational things happening that will change Death Knight cards. There might be some changes to core sets that could impact Death Knight, but in terms of like expansional kind of cards, nothing for Death Knight will be happening this year for rotation. Just to get that out of the way, now let's take a look at some of the most impactful neutral cards here that have maybe not as relevant the last couple of months, but during their time in Standard, they might have been very impactful. I want to talk about Kazakhstan. Definitely a very, very impactful card that was seen for quite a while in various decks. We have Onyxia. Definitely a huge impactful card, mostly used in Druid over Standard, but for every once in a while used, or it would pop up with some sort of discovers. But Onyxia specifically for Druid was very impactful, especially with the scale of Onyxia as well to helping keep that Onyxia immune. Spammy! Yes, that is right. The Spammy will be leaving Standard, so no more setting up that math to clear boards, or if you are playing as an aggressive deck, no more getting your board cleared by the Spammy Arcanist. It is going to be out of Standard. These next two are one-cost minions that I definitely think are huge for Standard over these years. Multiple decks have used these, and that is Peasant and Trogg. Yeah, the Peasant, often used in more aggressive decks, but a pretty solid one-drop all around. Trogg, however, used in quite a variety of decks. It seemed to be everywhere, and it was even heavily nerfed pretty early on because of how powerful it was. Originally, it would summon a copy of the Trogg, so people were buffing it, making it a gigantic Trogg, and then if your opponent played a spell, you'd get a copy. So you'd see like 5/7, you'd see 5/9s, you'd see 6/10 kind of things. Especially with like Hunter, with Doggy Biscuits and early buffs, or in Aggro Druid. It was just an incredibly powerful card. And even after that nerf, after that change to just create a base copy of the Trogg when a spell is played, still has seen so much play in quite a variety of decks, not just more aggressive decks. So that one will be leaving Standard. It's going to feel a little weird to have that one out of Standard. Next, we have a couple of kind of tech cards here. And I want to talk about Mailbox Dancer and Viper. Now, the Mailbox Dancer, not necessarily a tech card, but used in really key situations, most notably for standard in Big Spell Mage, to get that coin, give your opponent a coin, and then use Sorceress to switch the cost of your opponent's coin with a big spell that costed 9 or 10. But Mailbox Dancer was still seen in a couple of other decks across standard, just trying to get extra cards for Rogue to be able to play, for large minions with the location, just a lot of varieties for that Mailbox Dancer. And then Viper, of course, Viper was used more, I guess, in the kind of earlier months, earlier metas of this kind of standard rotation. Hasn't been used as much recently. Cariel, specifically in Paladin, definitely a huge use there, but it was used a lot as well for multiple weapons against like rogues and hunters, and also even just the fact that it has tradable, definitely huge. Tradable, all of the tradable cards came out in this Year of the Griffin, so all of those tradable cards will be leaving standard. Huge impacts there with that tradable effect that I feel like is something that a lot of players have become very accustomed to, with that tradable effect and being able to use that. And it's going to be kind of interesting to see what happens with some of these decks when tradable is no longer available to use as a mechanic in general. This next one here, Battleground Battlemaster. Again, not really used more recently, but definitely a huge talking point. It was used quite a bit in multiple decks, most notably Paladin and in like Charge OTK Warrior, for a ton of big burst damage to close out games very, very quickly. But Mech Paladin and kind of the more aggressive buff Paladin used this as well. To be able to push, 18, 20, 24 damage sometimes in one turn and close out games. So definitely, again, not something that's been used recently, but historically over this year, definitely was used. So it'll be interesting to see that one leave. Next up, we have everyone's favorite or absolutely most hated card, the Goldshire Null. Yes, it was recently nerfed to 11 mana instead of 10, mostly to impact Evolve Shaman, but it is still having an impact a little bit in other decks. But the Goldshire Null is one that has seen definitely use pretty consistently across its time in Standard in a variety of decks. Again, most notably recently, it was kind of egregious in that Evolve Shaman, but in other decks, in like control style Warlocks specifically, people would be playing this as an early removal tool because they were going to be drawing a lot of cards anyways. So even though the cost did change more recently, it still is a card that over its time in Standard has seen a lot of variety play across multiple decks. Now, these ones here, the watch posts, I will say most of the time these, and specifically two of these, weren't ever really used. When they were first released in Forged in the Barrens here, they kind of got a little bit of use. People were trying them. There wasn't as many cards in Standard because of the first set of the year. So people wanted to try it out. People wanted to try this whole watch post package and try all these different cards. But the posts didn't really work out how, I guess, Blizzard might have intended or how some people were excited for them to work. But most notably, one in particular here did have a lot of play over its time in Standard and forcing people to have increased cost on cards that they draw, especially decks that wanted to draw multiple cards, was pretty impactful in a lot of decks and was included in things like Big Spell Mage or other various Renathal and control style decks. So definitely going to be interesting to see how that one goes, but I always kind of felt like that one was like the last cards in the deck, right? It was kind of just added in as a bonus. These next two, we have some legendaries here that I wanted to talk about. These next two, a little bit more tech kind of related, but Mutinous and Samuro, Blademaster Samuro. Both of these did see play in various decks, but they really kind of came and went a lot over their time in Standard in the decks that they did see play in. Even when we did see some slower style decks, Mutinous wasn't always played. Samuro wasn't always used for removal, and there were times, like after last year's rotation, where Samuro kind of was missing some stuff, and then new cards came out, and then he got, better because of certain cards that you could use to buff him, and the cycle continued. So both of these cards saw play kind of up and down across their time in Standard, but definitely huge cards here. Mutinous, more of a single removal, but Mutinous was an answer to a lot of those OTK style decks that really relied on having one specific minion or one, certain body that the deck needed to pull off some impressive combo or OTK or just some impressive big swing turn. So Mutinous really answered that, whereas Samuro was kind of on the other side of that. Samuro dealt with a lot of those more aggressive decks that were going wide on board against things like Aggro Druid, more specifically early on, even though it still could be a little slow sometimes. But Samuro was one of those cards, I think, that really, really capitalized on the Frenzy mechanic. And Frenzy, also one of the mechanics that came out during Year of the Griffin that will no longer be in Standard after this rotation, unless they add more Frenzy cards. But the Frenzy mechanic, all of those Frenzy cards will be leaving, and I definitely think Samuro was one of those cards that capitalized the most on that Frenzy effect. I wanted to give a special mention here to Vol'jin. Vol'jin was kind of an interesting card that saw play a little bit like here and there over its time in Standard. I think, especially more recently, a lot of people kind of think about it in Shaman, in Evolve Shaman, to be able to pull out, put a totem back in your hands, pull out a large minion like Neptulon or Glug. But Vol'jin was definitely one of those very interesting cards where people kind of would use Vol'jin either defensively or offensively, removing, something from the opponent's board and then trying to take out an important key card from their hand. Not quite as effective as Mutinous, but I did want to bring that one up. Mr. Smite, another legendary we definitely have to talk about. Over its time in Standard, Mr. Smite definitely got nerfed. It had its mana increased, but, I think it also, in a way, I think Mr. Smite really kind of led also to the nerf of the Warrior Colossal. Being able to get 1 mana pirates and one of those be Mr. Smite and make all of your pirates have charge, very, very powerful. But Mr. Smite was definitely something that at one point before it got nerfed started to kind of get added into a lot of decks. Whether it was a more aggressive deck or a slower deck, it was getting up to the point where it was seeing a lot of play, just in a wide variety of decks, before its nerf that slowed it down a little bit. It did kind of fall out of favor for a while after that, but it still popped up every now and then. And I think for some players, still could be a good option in more budget-friendly if you had that card over some other cards. But, Mr. Smite is one of those cards that had its time for sure before it got nerfed. I would say the kind of pirate sunken ship rogue is the other most notable deck that had Mr. Smite in it, that a lot of people were capitalizing on getting multiple pirates out in one turn and pushing a lot of damage. And Lastly, I want to bring up Multicaster. This one isn't a super flashy card. It's not like the most impactful, used in every deck type of neutral, but for what it does, it did feel like it appeared in multiple decks. I think for me, most notably, Quest Hunter and Mage were kind of where I think we saw it the most, but Multicaster provided a lot of tools for those decks, and being able to draw 3 or 4 cards potentially off of Multicaster and get a body was very impactful. Quest Hunter, but again, most notably probably even Mage, like the Quest style Mage especially, that was running multiple spell schools, really took advantage of this Multicaster effect, and getting a body and multiple draw, very, very good for those decks. Thank you so much for checking this out. Each of these videos will be covering 2 classes leading up to our expansion announcement. Let me know what you think of some of these cards, or if there are any cards that you feel like were super impactful during their time in Standard that I missed, down in those comments below. Thank you for checking this out, and I'll see you in the next one.